The body was found at 4:17 in the morning, face down in the shallow end of the rooftop pool, one hand trailing over the infinity edge like she'd been reaching for something just beyond the water. Below, the lights of Lagos Island burned without apology. Victoria Island's skyline glittered. The third mainland bridge, a dark spine across the lagoon, held its breath. Nobody had heard anything. Nobody had seen anything. Or so they all said. The woman's name was Grace Okonkwo, though half the people in the building that night had never heard that name before the police made them say it back. They knew her by another name entirely. They knew her as the wife of a man who had told every one of them for 11 years that he had no wife. Something in that building wasn't adding up, had never added up. And now a woman was dead and 8 people were pretending to be as shocked as each other, and somewhere in the wreckage of that pretending was the person who'd put her in the water. Welcome to this amazing story world, friends. Please like, share, and subscribe. The building was called the Meridian. 43 stories of glass and engineered steel on a plot in Echo Atlantic, the reclaimed city within a city that was still arguing with the ocean about whether it had any right to exist. The kind of building where the lobby was curated, not cleaned, where the flowers in reception were replaced every 2 days, and the security guards wore suits. Nathan Adeyemi had bought the entire top floor 7 years ago when the building was still a model in a showroom. He had not done it because he needed the space. He had done it because he was the kind of man who bought things to prove that he could. He owned a shipping company, 2 tech startups, a minority stake in a Lagos real estate consortium that everybody in the room tonight had at least heard of, and, as it turned out, one secret he had kept from all of them. The secret arrived on Friday evening in a black Toyota SUV accompanied by 1 suitcase and no explanation. Her name was Grace. She was 31. Nathan was 54, and neither of those numbers was the most interesting thing about the situation. The guests had been arriving since late afternoon, because Nathan Adeyemi's birthdays were not invitations so much as summons. You came, you dressed well, you said the right things, you stayed until you were dismissed. 7 people had made that calculation and shown up. First was Dr. Sandra Bello, Nathan's personal physician of 12 years. She arrived at 4:30 carrying a small medical bag she took everywhere, the same bag she'd carried through 3 of Nathan's health scares and 1 incident in Abuja that nobody had ever fully explained. She was 50, precise, and had the particular stillness of someone who had learned long ago to show nothing on her face in a room full of people watching for weakness. She set her bag down in the guest room she'd been assigned, which was the same guest room she always used, and went to find Nathan immediately. He was on the terrace, phone pressed to his ear, watching the lagoon. He held up 1 finger without turning around. She waited. He finished the call, pocketed the phone, and turned to look at her with the expression he used when he was calculating something. "She's here." Not a question. "I know." "And what?" "Nathan?" He smiled. It was his negotiating smile, the one that didn't involve his eyes at all. "Nothing. Get yourself a drink, we'll talk later." They didn't talk later. Not the way she wanted to. Philip Osai arrived at 5 with his wife Miriam. They came from Accra. Philip had been Nathan's closest business partner since before the Meridian existed, back when Nathan was operating out of a 3-room office in Surulere, and Philip was running cargo out of Timaport. They had built the shipping empire together, at least in the beginning, before Nathan had used 3 years of careful maneuvering to reduce Philip's stake to something that looked significant on paper and meant almost nothing in practice. He knew this. Philip had always known this. He had simply decided at some point that knowing it and doing anything about it were 2 separate problems, and he had only ever been ready to handle one of them. He was 61 and looked it cheerfully. Large, loud, the kind of man who shook hands like he was testing the structural integrity of your arm. Miriam was quieter. Small and sharp-eyed, she held a glass of white wine with both hands and moved through rooms the way people do when they're reading them rather than enjoying them. She spotted the second bedroom's light on, the one at the end of the east corridor, the one that was always kept locked during these visits, and held that information behind her smile for the rest of the evening. Victor Eze arrived alone, which he always did, because bringing anyone into Nathan's orbit was a risk Victor had decided years ago he would not take. He was 44, the kind of handsome that was useful in his 20s, and now just looked dangerous. He ran the real estate consortium. He was technically Nathan's employee. Nobody in the room, including Nathan, believed that arrangement was permanent. He arrived with a bottle of aged Remy Martin and a smile that was warm and reached his eyes and gave away absolutely nothing. The bottle he gave to the housekeeper, the smile he distributed equally to everyone in the room. He did not go near the east corridor. But he looked at it twice, very quickly, the way you look at a door when you already know what's behind it. The youngest person in the room was Tola Adeyemi, Nathan's daughter from his first marriage, 26 and dressed in black even for a birthday party, which was either coincidence or communication. She flew in from London, where she worked at an architecture firm, and where it was generally understood she preferred to be. She came to her father's birthday every year because the alternative, not coming, had consequences she hadn't finished calculating. Nathan loved her the way complicated men love daughters, intensely and badly. He'd paid for her education, her flat in Islington, her professional registration, her first 2 years of salary. He had also, over the same period, missed every significant event of her life except the ones that required his presence for photographs. He did not understand why this was a problem. She had stopped trying to explain it. She was standing by the floor-to-ceiling windows when the east corridor door opened at 6:40, and the woman came out. Tola did not react, not visibly. She picked up her glass of water, drank from it, and turned back to the window. But her hand, for just a moment, gripped the glass hard enough to whiten her knuckles. Grace Okonkwo was not what any of them expected, which is to say she was not spectacular in the obvious way. She was quietly beautiful in a way that crept up on you, the kind of face that was ordinary in photographs and striking in rooms. She wore a plain cream dress, no jewelry except one thing, a thin gold band on the fourth finger of her left hand. Nathan walked her into the main living space with his hand at the small of her back and introduced her to the room. "This is Grace," he said, "my wife." The silence that followed was the most expensive silence in the room. The 8 of them were in this together. Nathan, Grace, Sandra, Philip, Miriam, Victor, Tola, and one more, Marcus Webb, Nathan's lawyer, a British Nigerian from Peckham who had been in Lagos for 15 years and knew where every body was buried, metaphorically speaking. Marcus arrived at 7, late by design, wearing the suit he wore to every occasion because it was excellent and he knew it. He came in, made the round of handshakes, and stopped when he reached Grace. He took her hand, held it a beat longer than protocol required, and said, "Lovely to meet you, Grace." His face said something else entirely. His face said, "So this is how it happens." Grace said it was lovely to meet him too. She had the voice of someone who had practiced being calm for a long time. The birthday dinner was catered. 4 courses served by 2 staff who were contracted for the evening and dismissed at 11. Nathan had requested it this way. Staff in at 5, out at 11. It was how he always did these things. Privacy was for Nathan Adeyemi a professional courtesy he extended only to himself. Dinner was beautiful and brutally tense. Nathan sat at the head of the table, Grace on his right. The conversation was conducted at the surface level with enormous skill by people who had spent years learning to talk without saying anything, and the topic of Grace's existence, her presence, her ring, the 11 years of silence, circled the table like something waiting to land. It was Philip who said it first, because Philip had never learned that some things were better left circling. "How long have you two been married, then?" he asked, smiling at Grace with the warmth of a man who wants an answer and is willing to look friendly to get it. 5 years, Grace said. Nobody looked at Nathan. Everyone was looking at Nathan. "And you're only just meeting everyone now," Miriam said, pleasantly, the way you say something that isn't pleasant. "Nathan and I preferred to keep things private. That was our choice." "Of course," Miriam said. "Of course." She picked up her fork. The subject did not die. It was just moved somewhere quieter. After dinner, they scattered the way people do when they've eaten too much and said too little. Philip and Nathan went to Nathan's office on the east side of the floor, the door audible from the corridor, their voices rising and falling, one of them using the word percentage twice in a row with increasing volume. Marcus Webb settled into a chair in the library with his phone and did not look up for 40 minutes. Sandra Bello disappeared to her room and did not reappear until 9. Victor Eze sat with Tola on the terrace. And Grace went to the rooftop. The rooftop of the Meridian was Nathan's private terrace, accessible only from the top floor via a key that locked from below with a key Nathan kept on his person. The pool up there was the size of a tennis court, infinity-edged on the south side, with the full spread of Victoria Island below it like a circuit board somebody had lit up. There was outdoor furniture, a bar cabinet, a sound system that had not been turned on all evening. Tola saw her go, watched her take the key from the hook by the kitchen, where it hung with 3 others visible to anyone who knew where to look, and start up the stairs. Victor Eze was still on the terrace below, sending a message on his phone. He did not see. Tola did not follow Grace. Not then. At 9:15, Grace came back downstairs. She poured herself a glass of water in the kitchen and stood there drinking it with the glass pressed to her cheek, which is something you did when you were thinking very hard about something that frightened you, even if you didn't know you were doing it. Sandra Bello walked in that moment, looking for something in the refrigerator, and stopped when she saw Grace. "Are you all right?" Sandra asked. Grace looked at her. "Then, did he tell you about us?" Sandra took a bottle of water out of the refrigerator and closed the door. "No," she said. "Told me nothing." "But you knew." "I suspected," Sandra said carefully. "That's different." Grace made a small sound that might have been a laugh. Everyone suspected. Nobody said anything, because nobody could. Sandra did not answer. She picked up her bottle, drank from it, and set it on the counter. "Be careful tonight," she said. "Of what?" Sandra picked up her bottle and left the kitchen. Grace watched her go. Then she set her glass down and went to find her husband. They were in the office together for 40 minutes. Nobody knew what was said. Marcus Webb, who passed the office door at 9:45 on his way to the bathroom, heard Nathan's voice, low and urgent, and one phrase that he caught clearly enough to remember. It was never the right time. He didn't stop walking. The last time anyone saw Grace Okonkwo alive was at 10:50. Victor Eze saw her. He was in the corridor outside the main living room, holding his phone, and she walked past him towards the kitchen staircase, the one that led to the rooftop. He said later that she seemed calm, purposeful. She was carrying nothing. He did not stop her. He did not follow her. He went back to the living room, where Nathan was in the middle of a second glass of cognac, and he sat down and watched the room, and he said nothing. At 11, the catering staff left. At 11:30, people drifted toward their rooms. The building went quiet. At 4:17 in the morning, Sandra Bello, who slept badly in unfamiliar places and had been awake since 3, went to the kitchen for water, climbed the rooftop stairs because the door at the bottom was ajar and she noticed the key missing from the hook, and found Grace face down in the shallow end of the pool. She did not scream. She reached into the water and checked for a pulse with the same hands she'd used to take Nathan's blood pressure 100 times. There was no pulse. She straightened up, wiped her hands on her robe, and went to wake Nathan. He was not in his bedroom. Marcus Webb was the one who called it because he was the one whose first instinct when confronted with a body was to think about liability. "Nobody leaves," he said. "Not until we understand what we're dealing with." They were gathered in the main living room at 5 in the morning, all 8 of them, in various stages of undress and disruption. The body had been covered, a folded table linen from the rooftop bar, because there was nothing else, and the pool door locked. Sandra had put on her doctor's face, the one that meant nothing got through. "We should call the police," Tola said. "We will call the police," Marcus said. "I'm calling them in approximately 4 minutes. I'm simply suggesting we think clearly before we do." "About what?" "A woman is dead," Philip said. "My wife is dead," Nathan said. He said it without inflection, the way you say something you've been rehearsing. Tola looked at him, then away. "Were the stairs locked?" Marcus asked. "The door at the bottom was open," Sandra said. "The key was gone." "So anyone could have gone up." "Anyone who knew where the key was kept," Victor said. Miriam said quietly, "We all knew. It's on the hook in the kitchen. We've all been here before." The police arrived at 6:20. 2 officers first, then a detective 40 minutes after them, Detective Inspector Raymond Okafor. Okafor was 47 and had the unhurried quality of a man who had been surprised by nothing in a long time. He was medium height, wore a plain dark suit that had been ironed but not recently, and had a habit of arriving in the middle of a scene and standing in the doorway for slightly too long before entering, long enough to see how people behaved before they decided how to behave for him. He'd been with the Lagos State Criminal Investigation Department for 20 years. He'd worked corporate fraud, political violence, 2 organized crime cases that had never quite resolved, and, twice before, deaths in wealthy households where everyone in the building had a reason to want the same person gone, and everyone in the building had a story that mostly, but not perfectly, held. He had one consistent problem. He trusted people he found sympathetic. Every time. He would do it again here. He was already doing it when he walked into Nathan's living room and looked at the assembled faces, and his eyes moved without quite meaning to Tola Adeyemi. Young. Frightened. The body language of someone in the wrong place through no fault of their own. He registered that response and filed it, and knew perfectly well it could get him into trouble. He was right. It would. He examined the rooftop first, alone, while a uniform stood at the bottom of the stairs and another secured the lobby. The body had not been moved since Sandra covered it. The pool water was still and clear in the early light. The sky to the east was doing something complicated. Clouds shot through with a brownish pre-dawn light, the kind of light that made things look both more real and less real simultaneously. He walked the perimeter of the pool. One deck chair was slightly askew, about 3 meters from the body's entry point. There was no sign of a struggle, no scuff marks on the tiled surround, no displaced furniture, nothing knocked over. But the pool light, operated by a switch panel at the top of the stairs, was off. It was a rooftop pool in the dark. A woman had come up here alone in the dark and ended up face down in the shallow end of the pool. He noted the switch. Off. He looked at the infinity edge, the city below. He went back downstairs. He interviewed them individually in Nathan's office, using the chair behind the desk because that was where the authority was. He was courteous and steady and gave nothing away. He gave them no indication of what he was thinking because he was, very deliberately, thinking nothing yet. Nathan Adeyemi went first, 54. Composed, mostly. He said Grace had been his wife for 5 years, married quietly in 2019 at a registry in Port Harcourt. He said he had not told his associates because and he paused here, very slightly, because he and Grace had wanted privacy. He said he had last seen her at 10 in their bedroom. He said he had not gone up to the rooftop. He said he slept well. He could not explain why his wife had gone up alone at that hour. He answered every question. He volunteered nothing.
Okafor asked, near the end, "Was your wife frightened of anything? Anyone here?" Nathan looked at him steadily. "No," he said. "She was not." His hands were folded on the desk in front of him. They did not move. After Nathan's interview, Okafor was fairly sure it was Marcus Webb. The reasoning was sound on the surface. Marcus was a lawyer who had been managing Nathan's affairs for 11 years, affairs that now included a legal wife who, by extension, affected every document he'd ever drafted for Nathan: wills, partnership agreements, corporate structures. Marcus would have known, better than anyone, what Grace's existence meant legally. He would have seen, with professional clarity, every implication. And Marcus had been on his phone for the entire evening, barely speaking to anyone. Watching, Okafor was quite sure, watching rather than just existing in the room. He called Marcus in second and pushed that line, gently, watching for a crack. Marcus looked at him with the patient expression of a man who had sat across from police officers many times on behalf of other people and knew exactly how this worked. "I was on my phone most of the evening, yes. I was reviewing a document for a client in London. They're on a different time zone. I can show you the call log, the emails, the document itself, if you like. What time do you need?"
Okafor needed 11 to 1 a.m. Marcus showed him the screen. Emails sent at 11:12, 11:47, 12:23, a call at 12:05 lasting 18 minutes, a document opened and edited between 11 and 1. He had barely moved for 2 hours. Okafor scratched Marcus off his mental list and started over. Sandra Bello was third. She sat down in the chair opposite Okafor with her hands in her lap and answered everything plainly, and Okafor had the strong impression, not an investigator's impression, a human one, that she had been answering questions carefully for a very long time. She had last seen Grace at approximately 9:15 in the kitchen. She described the brief conversation accurately. She described her own movements for the rest of the night: room at 9:30, awake from 3, kitchen at 4:10, rooftop at 4:15. She made no attempt to position herself as anything other than what she appeared to be. "You told her to be careful," Okafor said. Sandra held his gaze. "Yes. Why?" "Because she was a new person in a room full of old relationships. That seemed like a situation that warranted care. Did you think someone would hurt her?" "I didn't know what to think," Sandra said, "which is why I said it generally. In 12 years of working with Nathan Adeyemi, did you ever have reason to believe he was married?" She was quiet for 3 full seconds. Then, "I had reason to wonder once." "About what?" 3 years ago, he had a health scare. Cardiac episode. Minor, but he was in hospital for a night and he was frightened. He asked me to call someone, a number not saved under any name. A woman answered. He spoke to her for about a minute and then asked me to leave the room. She paused. I told myself it was nothing I needed to know about. Was it the same voice as Grace's? Sandra held his eyes. "I believe so," she said. "Yes." Victor Eze was the most interesting interview of the morning. He was relaxed, too relaxed in the specific way that people who have decided on their performance in advance can be relaxed, the kind of ease that has been chosen rather than arrived at. He confirmed seeing Grace in the corridor at 10:50. He said she seemed fine. He said he didn't know her well. Tonight was the first time he'd met her, he said. He had had no previous knowledge of her existence. Okafor asked him about the look he'd apparently directed twice at the East Corridor when Grace hadn't yet appeared. Victor frowned, lightly. "I don't know what you mean." "Tola Adeyemi mentioned it," Okafor said. He had not yet spoken to Tola. He was lying. Victor's expression didn't change, but something behind it very slightly rearranged itself. "Then she must have misread me," he said. "I didn't know anyone was in that room. Why would I?" He was very good, Okafor thought. Very good. But one lie, small, noted. The interviews continued through the morning. By noon, the police had confirmed what was already obvious to everyone in the building. The rooftop pool light had been manually switched off from the control panel at the top of the stairs, which meant someone had either switched it off when they arrived, before or after Grace, or Grace had switched it off herself. There were no other physical signs of violence, no bruising noted on preliminary examination. The cause of death was drowning. She had gone into the pool and not come out. Whether she had been helped in or whether something else had happened required a full post-mortem that would not be complete until the following day. Nobody was arrested. Everyone was asked to stay. By afternoon, the building felt like a closed fist. Philip Osei found Okafor at 3 p.m. on the lower terrace, where the detective was standing with his second coffee and looking at the city with the expression of a man who was either thinking very hard or having done with thinking for the moment. "Can I speak with you?" Philip said. "You can." "Not on the record." "Everything I hear is on the record," Okafor said, without turning, "but I am simply a man having a coffee on a terrace." Philip stood beside him. Below them, a speedboat crossed the lagoon towards Ikoy, small and fast and indifferent. "Nathan and Grace," Philip said. "I knew. Not for certain, but I knew." Okafor drank his coffee. "Nathan told me 4 years ago that there was a woman. He didn't use the word wife, but he said it was permanent. He said it was private. He said no one needed to know." Philip's jaw tightened. "I asked him later about the business implications, because if he had a wife and he died, the shareholding structure was complicated." "And he said?" "He said it was handled, that Marcus had handled it." "What does handled mean?" "That's what I wanted to know," Philip said. "I asked Marcus. Marcus said nothing had changed. I chose to believe him." He paused. "I was more interested in knowing than in doing anything about it, I suppose. And now she's dead." "And now she's dead," Philip agreed. He went back inside. Okafor stood there a moment longer, then took out his notebook and wrote 2 words: shareholding, handled. The 20% reframe arrived in the form of a WhatsApp conversation. Tola Adeyemi, finally interviewed at 2 p.m., had been careful and quiet and given nothing obvious away. She had confirmed seeing Grace take the rooftop key around 10:45. She had said she hadn't followed because it wasn't her place. She'd been in the living room for the next hour with Victor and Miriam, she said. She'd gone to bed at midnight. But at 4 o'clock, one of the uniformed officers working under Okafor, going through Nathan's tablet, which had been seized for examination, found a photograph. Not a compromising photograph, a simple one. Nathan and Grace smiling on a beach somewhere. The date stamp said 2018, a year before the registry marriage. And in the background of the photograph, almost invisible, someone else, standing at the edge of the frame, slightly turned away, in what appeared to be conversation with a man the officer didn't recognize. Not suspicious in itself, except that Victor had told Okafor he had never met Grace before last night, and except that behind Victor, on the beach, the man he was speaking to was holding a document folder, and except that when the officer ran the image against Nathan's business archive files, doing his job, following standard procedure, the man with the folder was identifiable as a junior solicitor from Marcus Webb's firm. Victor Eze had known about Grace, known for years, and he lied about it with perfect practiced calm. Okafor put the photograph in a folder and went to find Victor. Victor did not break when confronted with the photograph. He shifted. Small adjustment, barely visible, the way the sea shifts when a large thing moves beneath it. "All right," he said. "I knew about her. Not everything. I knew she existed." "You knew for how long?" "Since 2018. I overheard a conversation Nathan had with Marcus. I wasn't supposed to hear it. And you never mentioned it to anyone. It wasn't my information to share. Why did you lie to me this morning?" Victor looked at him steadily. "Because I knew how it would look." "How does it look?" "Like I had a reason to want her gone," Victor said, "which I didn't." "What would her existence change for you?" A pause. The shareholding restructure. If Grace had formal legal status as Nathan's wife, and if Nathan's existing structure had gaps, which I believe Marcus would confirm it did, then her position affected certain things, certain standing agreements I have with Nathan about what happens to my stake in the consortium if he were to die. So she was a financial threat. A potential one, if Nathan were to die. Which he hasn't. Which he hasn't, Victor agreed. Okafor held his eyes. Victor held his back. "Thank you," Okafor said. "Don't go anywhere." Victor smiled. "I couldn't if I wanted to." Miriam Obase found Okafor at 7 that evening, outside the kitchen. Miriam did not ask to speak to him privately. She simply appeared beside him holding 2 cups of tea, one of which she gave him without asking, and said, in the tone of someone finishing a conversation they'd already had in their head, "You should look at what she was carrying when she came." Okafor looked at her. "Grace?" "She arrived with 1 suitcase," Miriam said. "I saw it brought in. But the suitcase was hard-sided, and it was heavier than a suitcase full of clothes. I helped carry it from the lobby." She paused. "The housemaid said it was taken to their bedroom and hasn't come out." Okafor drank his tea. "Why are you telling me this?" Miriam looked at her cup. "Because Philip knew about her for 4 years and said nothing to me, not one word, and I'm tired of things being known and not said." She walked away. The suitcase was in Nathan's bedroom, under the bed, locked with a combination lock. Okafor had it opened, with Nathan's reluctant cooperation, which required a phone call to a judge Okafor had dealt with before, at 9 that evening. Inside, a large brown envelope. Inside the envelope, 47 pages of financial documents, shareholder agreements, restructured, Marcus Webb's firm letterhead on 12 of them, dates ranging from 2020 to 2024. The restructure was real. The shareholding had been reorganized over 4 years, quietly, to incorporate Grace's legal position. Marcus had done it. Nathan had signed it, and in the current structure, if Nathan died, Victor Ize's stake did not transfer to him cleanly. Grace's position created a lien on it, a claim that would have to be resolved before Victor got anything. Grace had, likely without knowing it in detail, been a significant obstacle to Victor's long-term plans. The 50% twist arrived the next morning, before the post-mortem results. Okafor had been building a case in his head around Victor, a careful, privately held case based on motive, the lie, the beach photograph, and the financial documents. He had not committed it publicly. He had kept it internal. Then the post-mortem results came at 11 a.m., and they destroyed one of his central assumptions. Grace had not been pushed into the pool. She entered the water alive and drowned, but there were no injuries consistent with a struggle or impact, no bruising on her arms or shoulders, nothing that indicated she'd been put in the water by force. What the post-mortem did find, a blood alcohol level that was significant but not extreme, and, more relevantly, a plasma level of a specific compound that the pathologist flagged immediately, a benzodiazepine, a sedative, present in sufficient quantity to cause profound disorientation, impaired balance, and an inability to respond appropriately to an emergency like falling into water. She hadn't been pushed, she'd been medicated, she'd been made unsteady, sent up to the pool in the dark with the lights switched off, and had gone in because she couldn't stop herself. The killer had never touched her. Victor Eza was many things. He was a businessman with motive and a habit of lying, but he was not a pharmacologist. He would not have known which drug, in which quantity, administered in which vehicle. One person in that building would have known exactly that. The knowledge landed on Okafor like a physical thing. Sandra Bello, 12 years as Nathan's personal physician, access to his medical supplies, access to the kitchen all evening. She had been in and out of it multiple times, confirmed by Marcus and by Miriam.
She had been alone with Grace in that kitchen at 9:15. She had handed Grace, as far as anyone could tell, nothing, but she had a medical bag, a bag she carried everywhere. And she had told Grace to be careful, which was either a genuine warning or something else. Misdirection. Cover. The thing you said to a person you were about to harm, so that if anyone overheard you, you sounded like their protector. The motive assembled itself quickly. Sandra had served Nathan for 12 years. She had been present through everything, the health scares, the late-night calls, the careful management of a man whose body was failing in small ways he didn't want to admit. She had knowledge of him that was intimate in the way that long medical relationships became intimate. And if she had hoped at some point for something different, and if Grace's legal position now affected Nathan's medical proxy arrangements, which it did because she had found this in the documents, Nathan had changed his medical proxy from Sandra Bello to Grace Adami in 2023. The motive was there: displacement, professional and personal, tangled into something that had apparently become unbearable. She had known which drug, she had had access, she had been alone with Grace. Okafor drove to the holding facility where Sandra had been asked to wait and laid it out carefully in front of 2 witnesses. Sandra listened without interrupting. Then she said, very quietly, "You are wrong." "Tell me why." "Because I didn't give her anything. I spoke to her in the kitchen for 4 minutes. I gave her nothing, touched nothing she consumed. You can verify that my medical bag contains nothing that matches what the post-mortem found." She paused, which I believe you'll find to be true because I already checked when I understood what was happening.
She had. The bag was inventoried that evening. No benzodiazepines, no sedatives of any class. The false case collapsed. A day passed. The building had reached the particular stillness of a place where everyone had been asked to stay too long and had stopped pretending it was all right. Nathan moved through rooms like a man who had misplaced himself. Philip and Miriam talked to each other in low voices that stopped when anyone entered. Marcus sat in the library again, phone on the table, not using it. Victor exercised on the building's gym floor below and came back up with his careful face intact. Tola sat on the terrace and watched the city. Okafor, who had cleared 2 suspects and had a dead woman with a motive problem, went back to the documents. The restructure, the shareholding, Grace's legal position as Nathan's wife. He went through every document twice, and on the second pass, 42 pages in, he found a clause that changed the problem entirely. The restructure was not defensive. It was not protecting Nathan's estate against Victor's claim. It was, on careful reading, creating a mechanism by which Grace, as Nathan's legal wife, could initiate a challenge to the entire corporate structure if Nathan died under certain specified conditions. Conditions that included evidence of financial misconduct by any board-level director. It was a failsafe, a weapon. If Nathan was killed or his assets were seized or the company was looted after his death, Grace could blow the whole structure up and recover his estate directly, outside the corporate shield. Someone had designed this deliberately. Nathan had signed it. Marcus had drafted it. It meant that Grace, alive and legally present, was not a threat to anyone's shareholding. She was in fact protection against threats to Nathan's estate. But Grace dead before any of this became public knowledge, removed that protection entirely. The person with the greatest interest in Grace dying before the structure became known was not Victor Eze. It was whoever was planning to move against Nathan Adeyemi's assets, and that person would need to know the structure in detail to understand what Grace represented, which meant it was someone who had read those documents. The documents were in the suitcase. The suitcase was under the bed. Nathan had said no one had access to it. But the suitcase had been in the building since Friday evening, and someone had gone into the east bedroom while the party was downstairs. By mid-morning of the second day, Okafor was certain it was Philip Assay. The architecture of it was almost beautiful. Philip had known about Grace for 4 years, he'd said so himself. He'd asked Marcus about the financial implications. He was Nathan's oldest partner, and his relationship with Nathan had, over 15 years, been systematically diminished to the point where his stake was vestigial. He had known, or might have suspected, that a legal wife with restructured documents could be used against him if Nathan ever decided to pursue the years of forced dilution. But it was more than that. Miriam confirmed during a second interview that Philip had excused himself from dinner at approximately 9:40 to use the bathroom. He had been gone for 25 minutes. 25 minutes. To go through the east corridor, enter the bedroom. The lock on the bedroom door, a coffers team confirmed, was a standard handle lever, not a deadbolt. A credit card or a thin tool could open it. Examine the documents, understand what they represented, and return. And Miriam, when asked if she had seen Philip's hands when he returned to the table, thought about it and said, "They were cold. I noticed it because he touched my arm and I said something about it." Cold hands. From what? The documents were in the bedroom, not outside, unless he'd taken the rooftop stairs on the way back. Just to look, just to understand the geography, just to think. A coffer laid it all out in Nathan's office. Philip Osei, motive compounded by years of financial grievance and the specific threat of Grace's legal position, opportunity during the 25-minute window, potential prior access to the rooftop stairs, and, this was the piece that made a coffer most confident, the fact that Philip's former cargo business before he joined Nathan had operated along the West African pharmaceutical corridor. He would have had contacts, would have known what you used and how. Marcus was in the room when a coffer presented it. Nathan was in the room. Philip listened to all of it with his large hands flat on his thighs and his face going very still. "I didn't kill her. I'm sorry for you that everything you just said sounds as good as it does." "Tell me about the 25 minutes, a coffer said. "I went to my room. Miriam and I had an argument that afternoon about coming here. She didn't want to come, she never wants to come, and the argument had stayed with me all through dinner. I went to the room to call her sister and ask her to speak with her." He put his phone on the table. Call log, 26 minutes. Miriam's sister is in Accra. Her name is Mrs. Efua Handand. Call her. They called her. She confirmed it. They checked the phone's cell tower data with the network. Philip's phone had been in the East Corridor houseway bedroom area for the duration, which mapped exactly to the guest room he'd been assigned. Not the east bedroom, not the rooftop stairs. His own room. The cold hands. He'd had the air conditioning turned to maximum because he ran hot. Miriam had complained about it for 3 days. He was on a phone call. Everything collapsed. A coffer sat in the library alone for an hour. He had been wrong 3 times. 3 different people, 3 different cases, 3 different collapses. He went back to the beginning. What did he know? The drug was administered. Grace consumed it. It was not in Sandra's bag. Victor lied about knowing Grace, but had an alibi for the 2 hours covering midnight to 2 a.m. Marcus Webb had been awake and in the corridor during that period dealing with his London client, and had confirmed Victor was in his room with his door open, light on, visible from the hallway. The only person who was genuinely unaccounted for, not fully, not across the entire night, was Nathan himself. Nathan had said he slept well. He had said he last saw Grace at 10 in their bedroom. He had not gone to the rooftop, he had said. But Nathan was not in his bedroom when Sandra went to find him at 4:17.
He had appeared 3 minutes later, from the east corridor, not from his bedroom, from the other end of the floor, at 4:20 in the morning, after his wife's body was in the pool. Okafa wrote it down. Nathan, not accounted for between 10 p.m. and 4:17 a.m., found in the east corridor, not his bedroom. Rooftop key on the kitchen hook when Sandra found it missing, which meant it had been returned before Sandra came downstairs. But if Grace had the key and Grace was in the pool, who brought it back? He wrote, the key was returned. Then he wrote, the drug. Then he wrote, the pool light. The 5 clues assembled themselves in the order they'd always been there. The first had been buried in the dinner conversation. Nathan had introduced Grace to his guests and said she was his wife. The naturalness of it, the performance of it, a man sharing something private. But, and Okafa had heard this and processed it as nothing, Nathan had handed Grace her wineglass at dinner and said, "I had them use the good burgundy for you." A small kindness. Except that Grace had been drinking water all evening. Every observer had noted that, but she had taken the wine. She had drunk it because Nathan had given it to her. The second, Sandra had said Nathan called someone from his hospital bed 3 years ago, a woman who answered, and yet Grace said tonight was the first time she'd met most of these people, which meant Nathan had never brought her here, had never introduced her to anyone, had kept her entirely separate for 5 years of legal marriage, not private, separate. There was a difference. The third, Nathan had said, when Marcus passed the office door, it was never the right time. Okafa had taken that as regret about the secrecy of the marriage, but there was another way to hear it. The right time, not the right time to introduce her, but the right time for something else, the right time to act. The fourth, the pool light switch, off when Okafa arrived. The switch was at the top of the stairs, which meant whoever turned it off was up there with Grace, not down here sending her up into darkness, up there, waiting. The fifth, the east corridor at 4:17 a.m. Nathan, coming from the wrong direction, a man found by a body, coming from the direction of the stairs. It took Okafa another 30 minutes to understand the why, and when he understood it, it was the simplest thing in the room. Nathan Adeyemi was dying. Sandra had known for 3 years, the cardiac episode, the changes in his medical documents, the proxy transfer, the restructure, the fail-safe built into the corporate documents for Grace. He was terminally ill, it emerged later, confirmed by Sandra, who had been bound by professional silence and was now bound by nothing. He had stage 3 cardiac failure. He had known for 2 years that he had between 3 and 5 years, conservatively. He had structured everything accordingly. But Grace had not known the extent of it, and Grace, recently, had begun to understand things, had found or been given access to documents she had not previously seen. And Grace, composed, quiet Grace, who answered every question carefully and had the voice of someone who'd been practicing calm, had come to Lagos this weekend not for a birthday party. She had come to leave him. Not quietly. She had come with documents. She had come prepared to make the dissolution formal, financial, and on record. The suitcase was not evidence of her importance to his estate. It was her exit strategy, 47 pages of documentation that would allow her to walk away with what was legally hers before he died, while she could still do it on her own terms. Nathan had known she was going to do it. He had known before she arrived. He had brought her here not because it was his birthday, but because this was the only controlled environment he had. A building he owned, a floor he controlled, people around him who could not leave without his knowing, who depended on him, who had their own secrets to protect. He had used the birthday as a gathering mechanism, and he had had 5 years of quiet access to medical resources, through Sandra's practice, through friends, through the kind of money that makes certain requests easy, and he had known exactly what to put in the wine, and how much, and what it would do to a person's balance near a body of water with the lights switched off. The failsafe was Grace herself, and he had removed it. Okafa called them together that evening in Nathan's living room. All of them. Nathan in his chair by the window, the others arranged around the space in various attitudes of exhaustion. Marcus standing near the door, Victor on the far couch, Tola on the edge of a chair with her hands between her knees. Okafa stood where everyone could see him and told the story. He told it in the order it had happened, not the order he'd understood it. Grace arriving, the wineglass at dinner, Nathan's hand at the small of her back, putting her on display because a man who is about to do something terrible sometimes likes to look at what he's about to lose. The kitchen conversation with Sandra, genuine, not a performance. Sandra's warning was genuine, and her guilt afterwards was genuine, and she had not known what was going to happen, only that something was wrong in a way she couldn't name. Grace going up to the rooftop at 10:15. Victor seeing her go. The key in the kitchen, which Nathan had taken earlier and replaced. The pool light. Nathan, who had come home first, who had been on the rooftop before Grace arrived, who had turned the light off and waited somewhere she wouldn't see him until the drug had done its work and she couldn't call for help and the pool was dark, who had come back downstairs with the key, who had returned to the east corridor and waited, listening, until Sandra found the body, who had appeared from the wrong direction 3 minutes after being called.
The room was very quiet. "There is no other person in this building," Okafor said, "who had the knowledge, the access, and the specific motive. Not to keep the marriage secret. The marriage was useful to him. Grace's legal position protected his estate. But Grace leaving was a different problem entirely. If she dissolved the marriage and took her legal position with her, everything built around her disappeared. The failsafe, the restructure, the claim on the estate that was meant to protect it after his death." He paused. She wasn't going to destroy him, she was going to survive him, and in doing so, she was going to walk away with enough of what he'd built to matter. He had months left, not years, and he knew it, and he couldn't let her go. Nathan Adeyemi looked at him from the chair by the window with the city behind him and said nothing for a long moment. Then, "You understand the irony," he said. "She would have been fine. Financially, she'd have had everything she was owed. I'd have seen to it. But not on her terms, not in the way she chose. She chose wrong." The room went cold. Tola stood up, just stood up, arms at her sides, and looked at her father. She didn't need to. Nathan looked at his daughter. His face did something then, a small, involuntary thing, and then it stopped. "I need my lawyer," he said to Marcus. His voice was unchanged, steady. Marcus Webb, who had stood near the door for the duration, looked at Nathan for the first time that evening with something that was not quite professional distance. He said, very quietly, "You'll need another one." He walked out of the room. They took Nathan Adeyemi out through the lobby of the Meridian at 8:30 in the evening, which meant the lobby staff saw it and the security camera above the entrance door captured it, and by morning it was everywhere. The building kept its lights on all night. The city below did not notice. Lagos did not pause for private catastrophes. It had its own. Marcus Webb sat in his car in the parking structure for 20 minutes before he drove anywhere. He was thinking about 11 years, about the documents he'd drafted, about the things he hadn't known and the things he had, and the line between them which was less clear than he had always needed it to be. Victor Isa flew back to Port Harcourt the following morning and spent the day reviewing the consortium structure with his own lawyers. He did not feel guilty. He felt, if anything, confirmed in a long-held belief about the specific way that money changed people. Sandra Bello drove straight from the Meridian to her clinic, arrived at 6 a.m., sat in her consulting room, and thought about a phone call she'd let herself ignore 3 years ago. Then she unlocked her filing cabinet, took out Nathan's medical records, and called the police liaison number Okafor had given her. Philip and Miriam flew back to Accra. On the plane, Miriam held her husband's hand, which she did not always do. He looked out the window at the cloud cover over the Gulf of Guinea and said nothing for the entire flight. When they landed, she did not ask him what he was thinking about. She already knew. Tola stayed. She stayed in the Meridian, in the guest room, not the bedroom, because there was nowhere she urgently needed to be, and because she was 26, and her father had just been arrested for murder, and she had not yet worked out what she was supposed to do with that. She got up, left the rooftop door open behind her, and went downstairs to begin the particular work of being the last Adeyemi standing. The chandelier in the main hallway had one dead bulb. Nobody had bothered to replace it. She passed it without looking up.
That's the end of this epic murder mystery. How early were you able to know the killer? If you enjoyed this story and want more, like, comment, subscribe, and turn on your notifications. You have no idea what's coming next.